To make this cart, I'm using 1x4s, although you could use 2x4s if you wanted the cart to be sturdier. For the wheels, I'm using 3-inch casters, 2 fixed and 2 swivel. And all the cuts I'm making with the miter saw, although I'm not going to show you any of the cuts because that's boring. Now I'm starting with the base. It's going to be 36 by 22 inches. To make the base, I'm going to use 4 pieces at 36 inches and 3 at 20.5 inches. Now everything is going to be glued together for this for added strength. While building this, remember that clamps are your friend. They can really help hold things in place while you pre-drill and add screws to every one of the joints. If it matters, I'm using 1 and 5/8 inch screws. Now with the main outer box assembled, I'm adding this middle brace just to add extra strength. But then I'm adding these supports on both sides for the wheels, but also to help keep the entire thing square with itself. Now with this box assembled, the base is nearly complete. The last thing, well, after doing a drop test I guess, the last thing to do is to add the wheels. Now for adding the wheels, it's incredibly simple. I'm just screwing these down. Now, the type of wheels you use, it may vary. With the wheels attached, the base is now complete, which means I can move on to the main body. Now to start off with the main body, I'm going over to my table saw and I'm measuring the height from the bottom plank where the wheel is attached. Now I have to cut out 4 pieces 3/4 inch shorter than that measurement. Out of those 4 pieces, 2 are being glued to the back corners, and the other 2 are going to be in the middle. You'll see what I mean later. Moving on to the pieces in the middle, these are going to be where the pivot point is added for the top. So I'm taking my time to square these up, using spacer blocks just to help make sure everything's aligned properly. I'm adding additional supports to the vertical pieces, both on the top and bottom. Now starting with the top, I'm actually using those spacers as added strength and gluing everything together there. So I think that'll help prevent racking. Now something else to note here is as I'm adding screws, I'm avoiding that front inside corner because that's going to be rounded off so the table can rotate. You'll see what I mean. Now before moving on, I added more supports to these vertical pieces on the bottom. This was kind of a last second decision. But after these, I moved on to adding the horizontal supports. Now, these really help prevent racking back and forth. It really makes the whole thing a lot stronger. I'm going to be using this as in-feed support for the table saw, so I'm spending my time making sure everything's supported properly, because the last thing I want is this thing falling apart as I'm using the table saw. Going back to the inside corner that I mentioned earlier, I'm using my homemade compass to draw a radius from the center point on that inside corner. There's going to be a pivot point here, and the corner has to be cut out so the top can rotate. So I'm just drilling out the pivot hole first, and then I follow up with the jigsaw to cut out the curve. And with that, the main unit is done. The only thing we have left now is adding the top. But as you can see, if I put all of my weight on it, it's plenty strong. And the glue's not even cured yet, so this will work just fine. Next, I move on to making the top. And what I'm doing first is marking out a location for the pivot point, which is going to be 2 feet from one end. The pieces I'm using here are 3 feet. I'm drilling a 5/8 inch hole because I want to use some bearings on the pivot point, but that's completely optional. You could make it 1/4 inch if you're using just 1/4 inch bolts. Now I'm checking the fit, and you get a better picture of how this fits together. The 2-foot section is towards the front, so when this folds over, that'll be close to reaching the bottom of the cart. Here you can see the bearings I'm using and how this works. The bolt I'm using goes through the top piece, through that top corner, but the bearings fit in that 5/8 inch hole there. But again, if you're not using bearings, it would just be a 1/4 inch bolt all the way through, which is a lot easier. Next, I'm adding more top supports, and these I'm adding directly on top of the top. That sounds weird, but earlier when I was saying I needed to leave 3/4 of an inch extra space from the vertical piece measurements, this is why. I'm adding a 2x3 cross support to the top. Now the main purpose is not to strengthen up the whole unit. It's actually to leave a strong joint so I can attach a latch to. This latch is so when you open the top all the way, it has something to lock to. The very last thing I have to add are these swivel stoppers, or that's what I'm calling them. They're pieces of wood that rotate up, so when the top folds down, the plywood doesn't slide off. All I'm doing is clamping them in place and then drilling out 1/4 inch holes, because I'm just taking a 1/4 inch bolt and sticking that through with a plastic knob.